Hello, and welcome to Collie Conversations, the podcast that's all about transforming your life with your Border Collie. I'm Gemma Fisher, your expert in all things collie. Whether you're dealing with reactivity, recall struggles, or just looking to understand your collie better, you've come to the right place. I'm here to help you turn those frustrating behaviours into wins with practical advice and real life solutions. If you haven't already, head over to our Facebook group to get your collie questions answered in my weekly live Q&A session. Plus, the group also has training guides, my recommended resources from the podcast, and lots of other extra support and tips for collie owners just like you. Today, we're going to be discussing why some collies have a dangerous habit of lunging and trying to chase moving vehicles. So grab a cup of tea and get ready to take some notes. Let's get started. So in last week's podcast episode, we talked about what our collies were bred to do. And that's really relevant when it comes to traffic training, because actually they were never really bred to live in areas where there would be lots of traffic going backwards and forwards. In terms of the need for a dog to be able to cope with lots of different sounds and lots of different noises, it just wasn't part of their genetic makeup because they were going to be living out on a farm in the middle of nowhere. The most they might be dealing with is sort of farm traffic. So you might think, well, hang on a minute, Gemma, does that mean that I need to move to the country? And if you want to move to the country, by all means, knock yourself out. But it doesn't mean that you have to. I live in a village with a fairly busy road that runs through the middle. I have friends that live in busier areas with more traffic going on. It's not impossible to live in a town with a Border Collie. It's just that we might need to do a little bit more work in giving them skills to be able to cope with things. So the first thing that we need to be thinking about is something that we've talked about before, and that is trigger hunting. All right. And trigger hunting in Border Collies is actually really interesting to me because when I start working with a client one-on-one, often the first thing that I do is I send out a history gathering questionnaire, and it's an enormous Bible of a questionnaire. And it's so that I get to know you and your Border Collie just as much as I possibly can. But even with that Bible of information and all of the questions that I ask, what I will often find is that people, out in conversations, things will come up. So, for example, recently in my Collie Culture Club membership group, I found that there are some dogs that get really fixated on when the dishwasher goes on, or when the beep goes on the washing machine and the washing machine is ready to go. Things like taking a cloth and cleaning down the side and using a spray to clean down the sides. Small things that don't seem of any importance at all, but these are what I am thinking about when I'm thinking about trigger hunting, because essentially that dishwasher going on, the washing machine being loaded, the spray being used, those are all teeny tiny things, but they're all triggers. They're all raising our dog's adrenaline levels and getting them kind of worked up. So the thing about triggers is, in of themselves, they're not awful. It's not like that is going to make or break your dog's life. But if we start to stack those triggers up, and let me give you for example. So let's start with barking in the garden. So maybe you've got a dog that when they go out in the morning, they're super excited and they like to announce to their neighbours that they are out in the garden and they have woken up. So, all right, barking in the garden, frustrating, but it's kind of one of those things. And yeah, okay, we can cope with that. But let's then add window guarding to our barking in the garden. All right. So maybe your dog has a particular spot at the back of the sofa where they can see, the comings and goings in your street. And as they're watching the comings and goings, they have opinions on it. They feel the need to comment on the comings and goings of your neighbours. So now we've got two things. So we're stacking up a little bit. Let's add a third thing. Maybe there's a loud noise somewhere outside. Maybe, next door is having some work done, or somebody banged a garage door down a little bit hard. So now we've got three things. We're gradually stacking up. Let's add, so we've got bark in the garden, window gardening, loud noise outside. Let's add the excitement of leaving your home to go for a walk. If you could imagine for a moment a volcanic eruption of emotion from your dog, where actually they cannot see, they cannot think, they cannot hear, because they are just so wound up because everything is stacked up for them. And now you're just hanging onto their body. You've got them in their harness and their lead, and you're just hanging onto their body. And that is the state that they are meeting the traffic that you are trying to walk them from A to B to get to your off-lead walk. Does that make a bit of sense as to why maybe they're finding this difficult? So one of the things that I refer to often in my dog training is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, the hierarchy of needs was designed for human beings' needs, but actually they fit everybody. They fit all species. And at the base of the pyramid, the important piece that we look at is the physiological needs. Okay, so that is food, water, warmth, rest. It's that piece. And I think often our border collies are not getting enough rest because they are alert to what's going on around them. So they're not sleeping very well. Or if they are sleeping, they're kind of cat napping and they're not getting a good quality rest. And in addition, we might have a dog that is maybe struggling a little bit with an iffy tummy. And so, the food need it's being met, the dog is being fed, but maybe they are not eating well, maybe they are not enjoying their food, that kind of a thing. So at that very base level of that pyramid of needs, there are a few things awry that we need to explore. The next bit up in the pyramid is safety needs. All right. So that's about the dog feeling secure, feeling safe. It's a fundamental need to the things that go above it, because if we don't feel safe, then there's lots of things that we're not going to be able to achieve. And I think for border collies, I think there is a lot of times where they don't feel entirely safe, that the world can be overwhelming to them. And it's about us breaking things down and helping them understand that actually they don't need to be worried about things. They just need a few more skills to be able to cope with, everyday urban life. Then on top of that, on top of the safety needs, we've got social belonging. So that's about our relationships, and that's about our relationships with the people around us. For our dogs, that's the people in their lives. That's the other animals in their lives, if you have other animals in your home. And sometimes when I start working with a client, that's one of the things that we need to look into, because the relationships that the dog is having are not really solid. Maybe they are chasing the cat. Maybe they are, there's a bit of grumbling between them and the other resident dog. There's things like that just on a day-to-day basis are causing kind of, trigger stacking to occur. And then as we start to make our way all the way up to the top of the pyramid, we've got esteem, a feeling of accomplishment. Now, as I say, this was a human designed pyramid, but I think that border collies really appreciate being told that they are clever dogs and using their clever brains. I think it fulfills a need in them. So if our genius level dog is really doesn't have very much to do on a day-to-day basis, that's something that we might explore to be able to better fulfill that need of sort of that feeling of accomplishment and self-esteem. And then this is probably not something that every border collie is going around thinking, but the top of the pyramid is about self-actualization, and that's about achieving one's full potential. Now, I do think about this a lot when I bring a puppy home. How do I bring out the best in this puppy? How do I help them become the amazing dog that I know that they are capable of being? And that doesn't mean that they're all going to be the same. Not a bit of it. All of my border collies have been different. But it's about achieving their full potential and the ability to bring out their best. That's the important piece. But as I say, that pyramid gives us a lot of insight into all of the things that go into that. And it's not just as simple as one training exercise that is like a magic wand that will fix everything. Now, when we start looking at solving a problem like a dog reacting to traffic, one of the things that we need to look at is whether or not we're using management or whether or not we're actually solving the problem. Now, management is important. It prevents trigger stacking, which gets in the way of learning, because if a dog is completely trigger stacked, much like a human, they are not going to be able to learn new skills to be able to cope in those situations. But one of the important things for me is being aware of when you're managing versus when you are distracting the dog from something that is going on in the environment. It's important because if you think, when you're distracting that you've fixed it or that you've solved the problem, actually you haven't really. And it only works because of the things that you are doing and not because the dog is more comfortable with the situation that they're in. I often suggest to people that a good way to tell is, if you came to me and you said, Gemma, I've got a spare half an hour. Would you like me to walk one of your dogs? I think I would feel pretty confident about sending any of those dogs out into the world without me being there, because they have the skills to be able to cope out and about in the world. Assuming, I'd done quite a thorough check on you first. I don't let anybody take my dogs out for a walk, but they have skills. They have the ability to be able to cope in environments. So if you don't feel like you could let, the majority of people walk your dog, then there are probably elements of management that you are using in terms of maybe distracting the dog from things that are happening. So one example, the counting game. So the 1, 2, 3, and then we produce treats. It can be a good way to potentially build a positive association with traffic. If you're using alongside traffic, it can do that. But if the dog is completely engaged in that game to the point that they are just oblivious to the traffic, that doesn't necessarily mean they are more comfortable with the traffic. It just means they are distracted from what is going on around them. And I would always much prefer that a dog is aware of what is going on around them and demonstrates that they are comfortable in that respect. Another one that gets used a lot with Border Collies, because Collies are quite playful dogs, is playing tuggy, playing with a ball at a distance from the road. So the dog becomes completely engaged in the game of tuggy, is playing with you, and the road can be doing whatever it likes because, it's fine. The issue with that, again, is it's fine, but you've essentially switched one fixation for another. So instead of fixating on the traffic, now we have a dog that's fixating on their toy. The dog isn't necessarily any more comfortable. It might, as I say, with the counting game, it might be creating a positive association of being, close to the traffic, but it hasn't actually taught the dog about the fact that that stuff is going on. And, I still need you to be able to, perform whatever behavior you're after in that particular scenario. And essentially, distraction is anything where you're actively doing something to prevent a reaction. That is a good example of, you managing the situation as opposed to the dog feeling comfortable. So when I am thinking about creating a successful training plan, one of the things I will start with is by explaining that loose lead walking training is much harder than people think, much harder. And you'll have heard me talk about the different levels of understanding that I think dogs have in terms of nursery level, primary school level, sixth form, all the way up to university and PhD level. Cars going past, if you are a Border Collie and you are concerned about movement and noise, that's a big PhD level distraction. It's a huge question to be asking a dog. Can you walk on a nice loose lead whilst that is going on? So the reason I say that loose lead walking is hard to teach, and I think most trainers would say, out of all of the skills, it's one of the hardest, is because you're a two-legged animal and the dog is a four-legged animal. So that immediately requires the dog to have some body awareness, an ability to be able to keep pace next to you as a two-legged animal, versus them as a four. If you think of most adolescent dogs, they struggle at the best of times, bumping into things, much like most teenagers. They're getting control of their body, and that's actually, as I say, quite a tricky skill. The other thing to bear in mind is that as well as kind of that body awareness of being able to control their pace, they are also having to manage another person and being able to be aware of what you're doing in relation to what they're doing. There's a lot of moving parts, and it's a difficult thing to teach. There's no question of it. And often when I start working with people, one of the things that they realize is how complex it is. And then, why potentially their dog has been struggling, because the information that they've been presenting hasn't been entirely clear. So that's one of the first places that we get started. Now, in addition to this, we're going to talk about the 3Ds. And the 3Ds in training are duration, distance, and distraction. Okay, so let's talk to start with about duration of behavior. Self-control is limited in dogs and people. Let's be honest, it is. Most of us can maybe, I know myself, like if there's a piece of leftover chocolate cake, in the cupboard at the beginning of the day, I can, throughout the morning, I can go, yes, it's fine. I'm not going to eat that piece of chocolate cake. But it's limited. My self-control is limited around chocolate cake. So towards the end of the day, I might just be diving in. I'll be honest. So, duration of behavior, that's something to bear in mind. If we're asking the dog for a length of time that they have to perform the behavior of loose lead walking, then, they better have, a good rate of reinforcement. They best have a good understanding of what that looks like. The other thing to bear in mind is how much self-control have they used up before you start your training session. So going back to the trigger stacking example, if they have gone through lots of things that morning, then it could well be that by the time you start your training session, there's already a level of self-control that has been used up. And now what you're asking for is, on top of that. This I will sometimes say to people, if they struggle going in the car, for example, and you want to go and practice your traffic training, but to get to a place where you can practice, you need to put them in the car to then get there. As I say, that's going to be using up precious reserves of self-control. How difficult is the behavior for them? So whatever it is you're teaching, I know that in this instance, we're talking about loose lead walking alongside roads, but, the ability to come back when you're out and about on a walk in the face of a distraction like, I don't know, a deer or something like that, or a squirrel or whatever, the duration that we want them to be able to come from one side of the field to the other, for example, that's a long way. And how difficult is it for them to achieve? How much self-control does it require from them to be able to do it? So, as I say, the self-control required to ignore lots of moving, flashing vehicles, to cope with the sound of the cars rushing by, that may require quite a lot of self-control, particularly like a farm-bred collie that maybe is very movement orientated. And does it require them to trust you? This is a good question. Does the dog feel a bit insecure, a bit unsure about the situation? Does it require that when you ask them to step into that situation, that they trust that you wouldn't ask them to do that unless it was entirely necessary? And indeed, that you will listen to them, that you will understand if they are feeling overwhelmed, and you will change something to make life easier for them. Important things to bear in mind. And my mantra, short and sweet is best. Short and sweet training sessions are the best ones. If you go on for too long, and, I'm guilty of it myself as well, but if you go on for too long, then what you can sometimes find is that a really good training session went belly up because we just went on for too long, because we were like, oh, let's do it again. Let's see if we can do it, and as I say, just end on a good one and end when you still feel like you could do some more, because that's a good time to finish. Right. The second D, distance. Okay. So the distance the behavior can be achieved. So something to bear in mind, that all dogs will try to avoid using aggression. Okay. So when a dog is barking, lunging, spinning, doing all of these things, it will be a last resort. It won't be the first thing that they thought of when whatever they were presented with came about. It might be now when they see traffic, that's their immediate reaction. But when they were a wee puppy, when they were a small, younger dog, they were probably little whispers of information that the dog was trying to tell us that they were not feeling comfortable. Now, habituation is the goal, all right? And this is the point where the traffic noise fades into the background. So it becomes something which is, it's unimportant. We don't want the dogs to socialize with the traffic. So often when we talk about socialization, we go, oh, we have to socialize, to traffic. And no, it's habituation. That's the goal. The point where the traffic noise fades into the background, much like when you're in the supermarket and you might hear the music as you walk into the supermarket, but by the end of your shopping trip, you probably, unless it was a really good song, you probably have, just switched off to it. Now, what distance is your dog when they don't even react by yawning, blinking, or nose licking? Just small signals that they're uncomfortable. How far is that distance? Because that's where we start our work. We want to know when our dog is just telling us quietly that they're not very happy. That's the place where we want to start working, as opposed to trying to deal with a whirling dervish on the end of the lead. Reading subtle body language is best recorded. So I always recommend people that when they start their work on doing some traffic training, is that you get somebody just to take your mobile phone and video what you are doing, because then you can watch it back in slow-mo and you can just really check in and make sure the dog was as comfortable as you thought they were, as opposed to, how comfortable they actually were when you watch it back. And then the third D, distractions to behavior. So the real world often presents multiple distractions at once. That's the truth of it. It's not like it's a nice clinical environment where only one distraction comes up at a time. So bear in mind that you might have used up some of your dog's self-control before reaching your traffic training session. As I say, if you've gone from A to B in the car, or maybe you've walked to a particular spot, to start your training, there may have been things along the path that they had to use up some self-control before you got there. I always recommend creating a list of training spaces so that you sort of grade them in terms of difficulty. Like, nice and easy might be, you're practicing your loose lead walking in a secure training field where there's nothing else going on. And then a really difficult one might be a busy A road. That might be the goal, to walk along a busy A road. Me personally, I try and avoid busy roads anyway. I find that I'm a bit sound sensitive. I've said before, I think I'm a bit border collie like in my ways. So bear in mind that even if your dog got more comfortable, you may still not want to take them, on walks like that if they didn't entirely need to. And once you've created your list of training spaces, one of the things that I want you to watch out for is that the dog is actually comfortable and they're not shutting down. So some people report that when they take their border collie to a really busy place, that the dog is just fine, that they don't bark, they don't lunge, they don't spit, they don't do any of those things. And I hope that the dog is comfortable, but what I suspect is that the dog is actually shutting down, that they're completely overwhelmed by everything that's going on. So what they essentially do is they almost put the blinkers on, and they just sort of put their head down and they go, do you know what? I'm just going to wait for this nightmare to end. And they just sort of shut down. So we want to be careful of that we don't overwhelm them to the point where they are just completely shut down and they're not giving us any information really about how they feel. They're just managing to get through it the best way they can. So some general guidelines for your training sessions. Give them a break where possible, and particularly in their life generally. Reduce those triggers where you can. Identify what they look like, and if they're in the home particularly, work on them. Come up with some ways that you might be able to either reduce their access to those things. So maybe they don't need to be in the kitchen whilst you're putting your dishwasher on, for example. Or come up with things like bed training and that kind of thing to work on those issues at home so that they get good rest. Review the list of needs. Okay, so I've talked about the list of needs in previous podcast issues, but if you're at all unsure about what those needs look like from my perspective, then just ask in the Facebook group and I will point you in the right direction there. I think supporting the nervous system with herbal remedies is a fabulous idea. We have a lovely lady, Holly Barker. She has a great Facebook group called Sports Dog Nutrition, where she makes lots of recommendations about herbal remedies, which have been brilliant for my students. And in fact, I've used on myself to good effect when I've been having a busy week. So yeah, thoroughly recommend using those to just support and soothe that all-important nervous system. Pay close attention for whispers. So make sure that you are not getting to the point where you're asking the question, Gemma, what do I do when they are, crazy and they are barking and they are lunging? When they've got to that point, it's get them out of there. But what we're aiming for is that we are listening to the whispers, because when we listen to the whispers, we become a person that our dog can trust. And that's really, really important in our ability to be able to take them into situations that they're not entirely comfortable with. Short, regular training sessions and lots of processing time. And processing time looks like rest. Okay, so this is again why rest is so important, and avoiding them being up on the back of the sofa and barking at people going by and so on and so forth. Lots of processing time is important for them to really take on board the new lessons that you are trying to teach them. And review your training sessions using video. My club students have me review their homework videos for them. So if you should need any extra help with kind of deciphering what your dog is trying to say in any of your training videos, reach out and I can point you in the direction of the club details. Because yeah, it's all important to be able to understand what our dog is really telling us in those training sessions. Now, just a final thing, 3Ds may change depending on triggers. Okay, so if you and the dog are having a good day, then it may be that from the duration perspective, your dog can maintain loose lead walking for up to 15 minutes. It's having a great day. Distance-wise, they maybe can walk alongside the road from home to an off-lead walk. All right, that's the distance and they're all good with that. And distractions on a good day, they might be able to cope with extra distractions, a cat popping out, a dog barking, a person stopping to say hello. Brilliant. That's a good day. But bear in mind, there will be bad days, just in the same way that there are for human beings. So on a bad day, the duration may look like only being able to maintain that loose lead walking for 2 minutes, and any more than that, and the dog is just like, no, I'm just going to melt down. Distance wise, they may only be able to cope with traffic at 10 meters away, so much further than normal. And distractions wise, maybe they can only perform it if there's absolutely nothing else going on. Just be, as you start to video your sessions, as you start to pay closer attention to triggers, what you will hopefully start to see is a picture of what looks like a good day for your dog, what looks like a bad day for your dog, and then be able to really help your training plans be successful by picking those good days, giving them lots of good information, and then giving them lots of time to absorb and process that information afterwards. And that's it for today. Thanks for joining me. I hope this episode gave you that extra boost to make a difference to your collie's behaviour. Today's episode was sponsored by my Border Collie training membership, Collie Culture Club. In the club, you get video training review, community Facebook group, and Facebook Lives for Q&A, just like this one, as and when needed. And don't forget, you can find the information about this and all the resources mentioned in the Facebook group. So head over there now. Next episode, we'll be discussing the complexities of loose lead walking training in a bit more depth and how to turn it from a struggle into a strength. So stay tuned. So until next time, stay focused on progress, not perfection. And remember, every small win counts.